You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Welcome back, everybody, to episode number 35, The Slow Ride Home. This is week 2 of documentary month.
Dose.
We are talking about The Slow Ride Home, the film of 8 members of a Seattle-based Soldiers of Destiny scooter club who attempted a 3,700-mile odyssey from Florida back to their home in Washington at less than a blazing speed of around 45 miles an hour. The tagline for this film is 3,700 miles, 11 days on scooters.
They called it a cannonball, but they didn't ride straight through, and I'll be honest, at 45 miles an hour, it's a long way from the real cannonball run.
This film stars Justin Barnes, who is the president of SOD, or Soldiers of Destiny, Joe Hamill, and Derek Hoffman.
What I think is hilarious is they have the leather or jeans jackets with all the badges, just like a Hells Angels style Harley club,
right,
except they're on scooters.
Right. We'll get into the rules of being in this club, but Mike, why don't you kick us off with the pickup line for this film?
Very apropos. What are we doing?
So let me see. I have the rules here. In order to be part of the Soldiers of Destiny, obviously you need to have a scooter, but you needed to have an animal helmet cover. I don't know if it had to be plastic, but it had to be an animal helmet cover, and you could not take yourself too seriously.
I think when you're riding these scooters, taking yourself too seriously would be dangerous.
Right. This is set in not very long ago, about 5 years ago in 2016. These guys were inspired by the Cannonball Run that runs from New York, is it Manhattan, to Santa Monica?
It's one particular parking garage in New York. I'm not sure which, I forget off the top of my head, to the pier.
It's interesting that they didn't pick Staten Island, so that it's water to water, because that's what these guys definitely did.
Well, the original Cannonball was one individual. If I remember correctly, it's named after a guy whose nickname was Cannonball. And I don't think he was intending to necessarily make a thing. He was just doing hey, how fast could I get across the continent?
Right. And so that's what these guys are kind of inspired by as well. And they set off. I mentioned that in the description, they talked about no more than 45 miles an hour. And I said to you, is that the speed limit of the scooter? Because I know truckers have a different speed limit than regular commuter cars. And so I said, is that the speed limit of scooters? And you said, no, that's pretty much their top speed.
Yeah, some of their scooters were, horsepower challenged.
Right. So we thought it was interesting that they start off in Florida and they're going about 5 hours. And it dawns on one of them that he's never been on his scooter this long. And that surprised you that they didn't.
Yeah. When people run a marathon, it's common for them to have run more than 10 minutes before the marathon.
Right.
You do a half marathon maybe as training, or even you just go out for maybe an 8-mile run one day. And the fact that these guys showed up in Florida, right from Seattle, they flew and shipped their bikes.
Yep.
Without ever having gone on a bike for more than a few hours is hilarious.
Yeah. Like you said, in Seattle, when they were in Washington, why didn't they drive to Leavenworth and back?
Right. And you would, sort out the communications and maybe some hand signals. Hey, we're going to pull off at this one, something like that.
Right.
You'd think. That seems to be pretty straightforward. Now, I'm going to say I'm stereotyping here, but with a nerdy sense of humor and coming out of Seattle, I assume many of them are in the technical fields, and I would think they would be logical and planning and all that kind of stuff. So I was curious, surprised that they hadn't ever done this before.
Right. Yes, that is shocking. They did seem to have some forethought, though, because they had a Sprinter-style van chase vehicle that had many common parts on it, so that when they broke down, they were smart enough to bring the pneumatic drill so they could quickly open up different parts of the bike. Didn't they even have a spare bike?
They had a spare bike on the back that they cannibalized for parts.
Right. So there was some forethought.
There was. Now, I brought up generally race teams use all the same vehicle, so it's easier to have spare parts. In this case, I don't think there was a duplicate vehicle at all amongst the 8. They all had different rides.
Yeah, because you get to pick your own ride, kind of what you want, right? Because some people want like the Vespa and some people want...
Right.
And so I noted that they also underestimated the heat and the bugs.
The elements played a vital role in this adventure, and they seemed to be a little bit prepared, but not totally prepared, which I'm going to go back to maybe a couple trial runs would have helped them out a bit.
A little bit, huh?
Yeah. So most of this film seems to have been shot either on a handheld camera by the director and camera operator, who I believe lives here in Portland, woot woot, or on their helmet cams. So they had these, it's called Senna. I hadn't heard of them, not related to the F1 driver. And it's a camera and microphone speaker thing that goes in their helmet. So that was brilliant on their part because...
And much better quality than Murderball.
Yes, much better quality. And they got the audio synced up with the video of everybody on the ride. And this comes into play at various points throughout the film. And then, as I mentioned, the director/camera operator, I think also had like a Sony camera that he was able to capture stuff when they were wandering around. But the essence of this is a road trip, right? And so having that camera video was really important. Now, we don't review series on our podcast, but I do have to mention Long Way Down and Long Way Round from Ewen McGregor and his friend Charlie. A very similar thing. You need to have both the establishing shot where you have the third person, the cameraman, and then you also have the footage from their helmets. I think it's important when you're making this kind of movie. So they did a great job at that. And the editing, it's hard really to see like what they necessarily did in the details of the editing, but they also did have the ability, right, to build the narrative by the editing choices of what they showed us. And the film is not terribly long. I think it was like 85 minutes or so.
It was, yes.
But I mean, I think it was paced well, right?
Yeah.
Throughout. And there was moments where you were concerned about what was going to happen to the poor guys.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, when you're riding scooters at a slower speed on the interstate, my concern was that they would have encounters with motor vehicles or, for example, semi-trucks, right?
Right.
Because they're so small and they're going so slow. Would people not be able to see them? Would they be blown over by just the air from a semi going past at 70 miles an hour, right? To me, that was a big part of the danger. But then we see during the journey, somebody has a mechanical breakdown, which leads to locking up the rear on their
that
scooter.
Was scary. He handled it well, though.
Oh, mad props to that guy. He thought quickly in the moment, and he was able to control the vehicle safely. It was really quite stunning.
And he was talking to his girlfriend at the time. So that poor dear, because he said, I gotta go. And he went off the road. They're all debriefing kind of after, and they're laughing, and everybody's happy because he's fine. And he goes, yeah, and I was talking to my girlfriend at the time. And I remember saying, call her back.
I have to say, if I was in his shoes, I don't know that I would be able to be that calm. I might have said some of the words you can't say on television.
Yeah, no way.
So that was a case where having the helmet cam was really, I think, useful in building the story and showing the viewer kind of what it was like for his friends to watch him suddenly lock up and veer off to the side, right?
There was one moment, I'm forgetting what it was, but they said there was like a title card and it said, our filmmakers didn't capture. Do you remember what it was? Was it like a rainstorm? Or?
Yeah, it was the like rain and hail of the century storm. And they say, oh, we didn't capture this, which is interesting because you have 8 helmet cams and then the chase van.
Yeah.
So as I'm talking right now,
how did
they do something that they didn't want video evidence to get out to the world? Or was it so scary that they knew that their partners
Or was it so bad? Because if you think about it, it could have just been horrible footage because of all the rain coming down. You couldn't see anything.
Now, this is just a personal note, but we famously had a road trip to Astoria and back one day, and on the way home, it rained so hard. I kid you not, I have never seen rain that hard in my life.
I've never.
And I expected to see fish swimming past the windscreen. It was raining so hard. I wonder if it was like that, where basically, it was useless footage because it was just pouring. And that's one of the things that we discovered, that they were kind of unprepared for that. In their planning, they hadn't left room time-wise, even though many of them had gear. And that gave them opportunity to do one of their challenges. So this particular challenge...
Wait. You got to explain what the challenges were.
Okay.
Because we haven't talked about it yet.
I was going to tease the audience with one, but all right. So they had a Kickstarter of some sort, I presume, for the money to ship the bikes there and other things. The cameras, maybe the Sena headsets. And they did challenges. So each person had a challenge they had to accomplish on the trip. So this was the 8 riders and the director. He was a good sport. And one of them had to wear a bikini and wash somebody else's bike. Mm-hmm. It was a bikini bike wash. Mm-hmm. And the bikini that was chosen was quite small. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can find them that are kind of more sportier. They got a little more cloth to them.
This one was not.
This one was not.
A string. This one was technically a string bikini.
Right. And I did notice that on his left buttock, if I recall correctly, there was a tattoo that I think said Leanne. And so I was hoping that was his wife's name, because otherwise that might be awkward. Although she probably would have seen it by then. So that was kind of fun. And that was a whole series of gags, which I thought was hilarious.
It was such a fun through line throughout the whole movie. The big storm that happened actually killed a Tamagotchi pet that somebody had to keep alive. Or I think 2 of them had to keep him alive on the trip. And one of them got so waterlogged in that storm that it died. The little toy died. One guy had to wear a ghillie suit for a day, I think.
Yeah, an entire day.
Yeah, an entire day. And my favorite was every single McDonald's that they stopped. This one guy had to stop and get something and eat it, which he thought, oh, this is the best one. And he said after like 2 or 3 McDonald's, he was over it.
Right. Although to me, the obvious strategic move there is a small fry.
Right.
But,
so we forgot to mention what happens if you did not complete your challenge.
Well, this is awesome. So you had to either shave one eyebrow.
Right.
Or you had to shave what they call a cul-de-sac.
Have you ever heard of that before? I've never.
A cul-de-sac?
Yeah.
No, it's called a tonsure, is that technical name for it, where you shave the top of the head. It's common with certain monks in the Catholic tradition. Or in Japanese culture, they used to shave the top. Even if you had hair up there, you would shave the top.
Right. But these guys called it a cul-de-sac.
They did, which is funny. As a person whose hair has gone on vacation...
You'd go for the cul. I think they would make you do the eyebrow because you already kind of have a cul-de-sac.
I do. I have a very large cul-de-sac, but I would probably shave both eyebrows at that point. But I have to interrupt and tell a bit of a story. Speaking of shaving one eyebrow, I worked with a guy once who had a mustache, and he was half Italian, so he had this great, thick Tom Selleck mustache. And one day he came to work, and he says, "What's different?" And none of us could tell. And then he told us, "I shaved half of my mustache." And once you see it, you can't figure out how you couldn't see it before. Like, we all stared at him and could not determine what was different. So these guys, everybody went cul-de-sac. I don't think I saw anybody go eyebrow.
I think everybody did cul-de-sac.
And of course, what you can do when you get home from the trip is you buzz your whole head and it grows back in even and you're fine.
Well, not only that, you can hide it temporarily with a hat. So that's probably why everybody went cul-de-sac and not eyebrow. It's kind of hard to hide the one eyebrow unless you get a really large eye patch.
That's true. Which eye patches are cool. And I was thinking, you could even go, like, Ron Howard is famous for wearing ball caps. So maybe you could get like is it Imagine Entertainment? What's his production company?
Yeah.
So you could even go thematically there while you're making movies.
Right.
So they had these challenges, which, by the way, I wonder if we should adopt on our subsequent road trips. Maybe not quite as bad as theirs, but it's kind of fun.
It is fun.
And it reminded me of that show with Tom Cavanaugh called Ed, where the two characters kept making these bets. And it was nothing that was horrible. It was all just kind of silliness, where maybe it would be slightly embarrassing for the other guy. So that was kind of fun. But slightly embarrassing is kind of the key to this, because you're wearing animal things on your helmet and you're driving a little knees together Vespa scooter on a cross-country road trip. That's kind of embarrassing by itself to a certain degree, but it's also kind of fun. I appreciate their spirit of adventure. And again, not taking themselves too seriously.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
So the actual Cannonball Run record is down to like 25 hours or something now. These guys took 11 days. And
so they weren't in it for the speed.
They were not in it for the speed. And they mentioned that they had to average something like 8.5 hours a day at speed, which is a long time. So I'm not sure how many people have spent 8.5 hours behind the wheel of a motor vehicle where you can sit and you've got air conditioning and radios and all that stuff. But 8.5 hours on a little bike is, it's windy and it can be hot. It can be cold. It's wet. That is really substantial.
It's a long time.
It is a long time.
In one position, too.
Right. And a lot of them, they tried to install like foot pegs where it could stretch the legs out, or you'd see them, the others.
You'd see them kick their legs out to just move
trying,
them. So.
Which I would have to do, stretch my legs.
Yeah.
My knees wouldn't take it. But what I thought was interesting is they said day 2 was the roughest. And looking back to the auto cannonball, a lot of the drivers say St. Louis is the worst because you start at midnight in New York City, and just the way it works out, how fast you're going, about sunrise, you're around St. Louis. And they said, up until the sun comes up, it's just a fun gag. And when the sun comes up, it hits you. Holy crap, I'm only a quarter of the way across the country, and I have all this ahead of me. And I wondered if it was similar for these guys. The first day was a bit of a lark. We were excited. We didn't know what we were doing. They had a breakdown almost immediately. And then that second day, and they tried to get up early, like 5 or 5:30.
Well, some of them did.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, the plan was to get up very early, which I admire, but not everybody was on the same page. And one of them said, oh, it was back to normal. Bickering started.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is interesting. But by the end of the film, they talked as if they were even better friends. So I wonder how much, the club was it just kind of, you're a little bit like, I see this guy every month.
Right.
We get together, we ride around the park, and then we call it a day. And this was pretty intense to spend 11 days and 3,300 miles or whatever it was together.
Right. Yeah, I think it definitely bonded them. I wonder if they normally would just go out for an hour or two, because I don't think the bikes broke down very much, because one of the okay, first of all, I've never ridden a scooter, so I speak from no experience. I'll put that out there right now. But it seemed like it was way too easy to accidentally turn it off and not realize you had done it. That seems like not only some troubleshooting in the design department, but they would just start tearing the bike apart. And one time they discovered, the guy just accidentally hit his kill switch.
Right. There's a couple times that happened. We saw one of those on screen. Yeah. So
I have a question.
Yeah,
okay. In the spy movies or like war movies,
sure.
There's a little cap that kind of goes over the really important button
and you
to prevent
flip it up.
somebody from accident. Yeah, you have to flip up the cap to expose the button. Why wouldn't your kill switch have that?
Because these are scooters, and scooters are generally sold to people who don't know what they're doing. And so you want them to be able to panic stop it when something goes wrong. So imagine if you put, for example, your lovely mother on a scooter just to poke around her neighborhood. If she gets flustered, you just want her to be able to move her thumb and kill the thing so that she doesn't launch into traffic.
Maybe it needs to have that thing that the treadmill has, that you clip it to your body.
Right. Except that if you've fallen off enough to pull that, it's kind of too late. So you've already fallen off. So I'm going to say yes. And the fact that they didn't try starting it again. So this is where I said they seem to be unprepared for this trip. And at one point, they were talking about when this was proposed, and one of them says, "That's crazy, I'm in." And it reminds me, there's a t-shirt that people in the car world sometimes see, which says something to the effect of, "That sounds dangerous. What time?" Or, "That's idiotic. What time?"
Right.
So I loved their spirit of, hey,
Absolutely.
We're not prepared. We're not going to be prepared. We're just going to go for it. That is, in some sense, I think, truly the spirit of the American frontier kind of Western mindset, right?
Yeah.
We're going to forge ahead into the wilderness with no real idea of what we're doing.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, this is a great film. Don't get me wrong.
I really love this film. I stumbled across it.
Yep, this is another one of your indie film. I've never heard of it. He finds it. We watch it. And it's like, oh my God, that was a really cute movie.
Yeah, I really think this film should have gotten more buzz. One of the things I did like about the whole spirit of the thing is the first title card is all the laurels from the festivals they were rejected from.
Yeah.
Right? And then they actually have one from the Portland Motorcycle Film Festival.
That they were rejected?
No, they got into.
Oh, good.
Now, any other place I'd say that was a made-up joke, but in Portland, we might actually have a motorcycle film festival.
Oh, yeah. Of course we do.
Right. And so now I'm thinking, how many films are in there? I maybe need to put one in there because I have a good chance. Not a lot of competition.
I don't know, because this one was a good movie and they were rejected.
Well, no, they made it to the Portland Motorcycle Film Festival. They did well.
I thought they.
And I believe the director's name is Jesse Morrow, so we could
is.
probably contact him to get some deets on that film festival.
Yeah.
But I did like that spirit of humor. But
Yeah.
how did we not hear about this film? Because it's just so fun to me. And
Yeah.
maybe this is my weird perspective. But we've talked a little bit about how I'm not the biggest fan of documentaries. And the reason is I don't like documentaries that are trying to advance a cause. They feel too much like propaganda to me. This is not that. This is literally the best of a documentary. They found an interesting subject that you would never know about, and they filmed it, and now you know about it, and it was entertaining.
Yep.
So this is great. This is my kind of jam.
Yeah, it was fun. But it was not without its danger. Like you said, the guy almost went off the road, and then they were so excited because there's this really well-known patch of tarmac, as Ewen McGregor would call it.
Ewan.
Was it in like Kentucky?
Tennessee, I believe. Tennessee.
Yeah, I thought it was in that region. And it was called the Tail of the Dragon. And it was 11 miles with 318 turns in it.
Sounds fun.
And they were all so excited to ride it because, you know, that's the fun of not only motorcycles, but you even have commented that roads with lots of turns are more fun to drive than just straight. They're doing this, and to some of them, it was kind of a bit of a yawn, I guess. But shortly after they all completed it, a father and his daughter went off the road. So it made it pretty early in the film, I'd say about a third of the way through, that this is not without its danger. Like, this is all fun and animal helmets and everything, but this ride needed to be taken seriously.
I support motorcycle riders to ride motorcycles, but I personally don't because of the inherent danger in a motorbike versus a vehicle, just because there's no roll cage around them, right?
Right.
And if you look
Very
at
vulnerable.
stuff like Pikes Peak, where these guys go flying up there, you know, a couple of years ago, a guy in a car went over and he was fine, maybe bruised, because he had this great roll cage and 5-point harness and everything. And then a couple of years ago, a motorcyclist went over and he didn't make it. It's very dangerous just by itself, even without the speed. I mean, we think, 45, we're making jokes, 45 miles an hour. But remember, that's twice as fast as Usain Bolt runs. So imagine if you hit something at that speed, it's going to hurt. So these guys, yeah, it's silly. But it also, there was definitely a bit of danger there, right? And then, like you said, when you saw the one guy go off the road and you hear the story of this motorcycle crash, there was some amount of danger there.
Yep.
Now, I have to say, though, part of it was, at one point, as part of the challenges, so one of them has to sleep outside.
Oh, that's right.
And I said that was probably not as dangerous for a group of 8 adult males than it might have been for other people, right? Maybe even a non-white person might not have been as comfortable sleeping outside just in the middle of nowhere. But that part didn't seem particularly dangerous to me. He seemed a little freaked out by it, but I think they were going to be okay. So one of the interesting things is when we talk about documentaries, you don't really think about set building. But one thing I noticed was they interviewed the Soldiers of Destiny for kind of their like confessional, you might even say. And they all were in the same spot. They're obviously in the same room.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
So my question is, did they build that clubhouse, or was that someone's garage that they'd already decorated like that as the clubhouse of the club, right?
Right.
But I don't think there were any costuming or other quote-unquote sets. It was all just kind of what they had, including the bikini.
Right.
So part of their spirit of fun, I have to say, I think it was just one of the scooters, but it might have been more than one. There are these letters. They're kind of like rectangles that are a little bit skewed. You can buy at Home Depot to put your name and address on like the mailbox.
Right.
And somebody had gotten those and they put 2 signs that I saw on the scooters were slow, dumb, fun. And then on the back it said slow as hell.
Yeah, I remember that one.
So we did not see footage of people flipping them off or throwing things at them.
I know. And then, because when they got to the end, they created pretty much like a wall of all of them and they wouldn't let people by. And I was like, oh my gosh, if you're only going 45 miles an hour, I know you're so excited because you've gone 3,700 miles and now you're coming to the end, but nobody else understands why you're not letting them around, why this is momentous.
Right. It wasn't a documentary to the people trapped behind them.
Right.
They're just trying to get home or what have you.
I'd love that someone who was trapped behind them stumbles on the documentary and they go,
right.
Oh, remember those guys?
That's what they were doing. Yeah, morons. Yeah, so that is a question about, did they make enemies along the way?
Yeah.
But when you think of a documentary, these guys are kind of what I think the true indie spirit is, because as far as I
Yeah.
could tell, there was a driver for the chase van, and then the director/camera operator. That was the crew.
Yep. As far as I could tell, that's what I saw.
I mean, I totally respect that they did it with like a small crew like that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I wonder what his relation was, because he wasn't one of the writers, so he had to have been friends with one of these guys, but maybe they hired him to document it. I'd love to know that story. I should look him up and email him.
Right. I actually have already emailed him.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't invite him to be on the show, but he is welcome to come on the show.
We'll do part 2.
Yeah. Or if he's involved in another project, he can kind of pimp for that a little bit. Maybe he's fundraising for his next project.
Yeah, that was one of our pauses. We paused 3 times. One, to discuss how scary these guys, when they realized how scary it could be. The second time was to talk about him. He was actually in the film, but he was listed as the photographer, not as the director, which I found interesting. And I wondered if it was that cliche, because a lot of documentary filmmakers, like next week, Griffin Hammond, he talks about like his reluctance to put himself in the documentary. And so I wondered if that's why he didn't do it. And then the third time we paused was to talk about how they didn't practice this ride.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. So I don't think there was a smoochie, and I don't believe that we saw head trauma.
No, which is amazing. Given
Other
that
than
it was,
the cul-de-sacs.
Yeah, I don't consider that trauma.
And the whole movie pretty much was a driving review.
It really was. I will say that they were not the best at safety, but relatively speaking, I think they're okay. I thought it was very inventive that when somebody would break down, the others would pull up next to him and put their foot out on his foot pegs to then push him to the next spot where they could work on the vehicle.
I thought it was nice that when somebody broke down, it wasn't just like they just had the chase van like kind of break down with, like they all stopped, and it was like they all rode together.
Right. On Top Gear, they just abandoned James May.
Right.
But here
so
they stay.
Is that part safety? Is that part just if we're going to start together, we're going to end together? Because they obviously, the other riders could have gone, they all agree to stop at this town and that's where we're going to spend the night. So people could have ridden ahead, but they didn't. I thought that was cool.
Yeah, it's camaraderie. I think it's appropriate.
Yeah. But I also would think that would be a bit of safety too, because like anytime I'm driving and I see a group of motorcycles, they are a group, and you kind of give them all a wide berth versus just a single rider. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think you have to band together.
Yeah.
Zebras do that.
Yeah. All right. So should we go to the numbers, or do you have anything else?
Let's go to the numbers.
Okay. So the filming locations I'll mention, obviously, Florida, South Carolina, Tennessee, Missouri, Nebraska, Wyoming, South Dakota, Montana, and then Washington. This is a 2020 film. I couldn't find budget information for this film because of its probably indie status. And so therefore I don't know how well it did, because I also, Box Office Mojo had no information for how much it made. We paused 3 times. It was 1 hour and 21 minutes, and it has a score on IMDb of 7. I believe it was not rated. It didn't list the rating, so.
I don't put like much weight on IMDb ratings per se, but I think 7 just feels low. I would give it more than a 7.
An 8? I wouldn't give it more than an 8 though. I mean, it was a good movie, but I don't think it was like amazing.
Yeah, I'd at least give it an 8 though. I liked it.
Yeah.
I liked it a lot.
Yeah. Northwest Pride, all of the writers are from Seattle.
You're right.
So anyway, we first saw it on Amazon, but I think that's where we saw it. I think maybe the first time we saw it for free, and now you have to pay a little bit.
Yeah.
To watch it. All right, so that's it for the movie Slow Ride Home. Please enjoy it if it sounds like something that would tickle your fancy to watch these clowns. If not, I definitely echo Mike's recommendation for The Long Way Down and The Long Way Around. And there's a third one. Is it The Long Way Up?
I think so.
I'll put it in the show notes. I made a note to add it to the show notes. It's Ewen McGregor and his friend Charlie. In 2 of them, they ride actual motorcycles. And in the third one, they do electric motorcycles.
Spoiler alert, it's not as good as the first two.
But all three are fun and they have a good sense of humor. And so that's another fun road movie. Join us next week when we're talking about the movie Sriracha, another indie film made by Griffin Hammond.
Hot stuff.
Yep. And don't forget,
Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.